supplemental.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I speak in support of the amendment. The TPP-11 is not a great trade agreement, certainly not from Australia's point of view, and if you really want to understand why it's not a great deal, you really only have to look at the process. It was badly done. The trade and economic benefits are minimal, and it has some very serious shortcomings that speakers in this debate have identified. It does have some regional plurilateral benefits as an agreement that binds together countries in the Pacific, but it could have been so much better. And really, we should, I suppose, as we debate it and we consider the way forward, we should, rather than adopting a kind of a barracking approach, which we sometimes see from the government, that tries to suggest that all free trade agreements are in of themselves wonderful things that we have to sort of patriotically sign up for, that trade agreements can consist of and do consist of all sorts of things mixed up together. And we have to make sure it's actually the responsibility of the government and the parliament to get that mix right and to make those agreements as strong as they can be. At the moment, our process for forming these agreements is not good enough. And I want to acknowledge the work that the Shadow Minister for Trade has done to set a path forward for us, for Australia, for a shortened Labor government, if elected, to really improve the deficiencies in the process as they stand. We talk about free trade agreements. We should get the language right. This is a plurilateral agreement that puts in place some sort of preferential arrangements between countries to that agreement. It's an uneven set of arrangements. It's not the case that all participating countries sign up to a common set of changes or concessions. It's vitally important when we talk about trade agreements and trade and investment agreements that we start from the position of recognising they encompass a lot more than just what you would consider traditional matters of trade. I mean, first and foremost, it does deal with tariffs and market quotas. Those are the sort of traditional trade bits and pieces. It does deal with rules of investment separate from trade, and that includes the investor-state dispute resolution mechanisms that so many people have talked about. It deals with labour market access, so therefore it bears upon and has implications for our migration framework. And this agreement does deal with labour rights and environmental protection standards, and that's a good thing. But again, if you want to be realistic, you look at the way in which it gives away labour market access protections and skills testing protections on the one hand. It gives away those things holus bolus. It gives away those things unequivocally. The labour standards and the environmental protections are, you would say, they're aspirational. I'm glad that they're there. I'm glad that there's a framework for participating countries to perhaps strengthen those things in future. But let's not be mistaken in thinking that there's some equivalence between the pernicious aspects of this agreement on the one hand and the things that are potentially beneficial. On the trade side of things, there are some gains in this agreement for Australia, there's no doubt. So if you find the right sector, they will sing its praises because they stand to benefit from it. It's going to eliminate tariffs on cheese exports to Japan. It's going to improve butter and skim milk quotas for exports to Japan. So our exports will be able to enter into some countries at a lower cost, be more competitive. We will get greater access in the form of quota expansion in some cases. Tariffs on all seafood exports to Canada, Vietnam, Mexico and Japan will disappear over time. The 15% tariff on packaged wine exports to Japan will wind out by 2021. So, of course, there are producers in this country that will get some benefit from the TPP-11. But overall, what's the overall aggregate economic benefit? It's hard to know. It appears to be very slight. 0.5% GDP over 10 years. That's not a massive positive impact, and we should start even when we look at those projected benefits. We should start by recognising that the projected benefits for agreements in the past have not generally been delivered. And as part of the way we look at this and improve our process over time, if any government is so convinced of the benefits of a trade agreement that it strikes, it should be prepared to go back as time progresses and check its projections against the reality, because the reality in almost all cases is much less beneficial than we were led to expect. There hasn't been any independent analysis of this agreement done at all. You know, the national interest analysis is done within the department. The department negotiates the agreement. Do they think it's worth entering? Well, surprise, surprise, they do. That's one of the changes that Labor has committed to. The Joint Standing Committee on Treaties, on a majority basis, it's a committee with a government majority and a government chair, and I've been a member of that committee. Every time we look at trade agreements, we have recommended to government that they commission independent economic analysis, and government keeps coming back and saying we're not going to do that. You know, it's hard to understand, and it's no one. We commissioned the Productivity Commission report, looked at trade agreements under the previous Labor government, and some equivalent organisation will under a Shorten Labor government if elected. Some independent analysis done for the World Bank suggested that the impact of the original TPP would cost 39,000 full-time jobs in this country. There wasn't separate analysis done on the jobs impact of the TPP-11. We know, in terms of the pernicious aspects of the agreement, it gives away labour market testing for 6 countries. Why? Why? They are lopsided concessions. So they're not being given for something. You know, they're not being traded. They're being given away because they suit the agenda of the government. The government has a labour market deregulation agenda that it can't get through this place because they know that it doesn't wash with this parliament and it doesn't wash with the Australian public. They've been using trade agreements to advance their labour market deregulation agenda. The United States does not, as a matter of principle, include labour market arrangements of any kind in any trade agreement. They just do not do it. That is the province for their domestic congressional processes and for their migration and their temporary labour